Hi, everyone. Welcome to this second inquiry video in the PEPSA Inquiry Video Series. These have been created just for you to help you through the inquiry process as a PEPSA participant. Once again, my name is Nancy Fichtman-Dana, and I'm just delighted to be introducing you to the process of inquiry and teaching you about some of the finer points of the process. So without any further ado, let's get to one of those finer points in today's video. And to do so, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Like I did in the first video, I created some PowerPoint slides for you to take us through the second topic. And that topic is developing a wondering. I want to begin this video, though, with just a very brief review of what we covered in the introduction to inquiry video. So we began with a very simple definition of the inquiry process and defined that as systematic, intentional study by teachers of their own practice. And then what I did is I shared with you and defined 5 different components of the inquiry process. And those included developing a wondering, collecting data, analyzing data, taking action, and sharing with others. And then, of course, it's always good to see what something looks like in practice. So in our last video, we looked at one example of teacher inquiry, and that was the example of Debbie Hubble. And by going through that example, you were able to see how each one of those 5 components translated into a real live inquiry cycle through the work of Debbie. If you remember, when we ended that example, I shared with you Debbie's actual words, and that began with, teacher inquiry has become not something I do, but more a part of the way I think. And that's where I want to start us off in this video, that idea of inquiry being a way that you think. If you think back to the first video, I alluded to this in the definition part of that video when we were defining what inquiry is. And before I taught you about those 5 components, components that you are going to journey through in your PEPSA inquiry experience, I said, it's really first and foremost important to realize that inquiry, more than anything else, is a way of being. And that being includes 3 things. Problematizing practice, because teaching is just a really complex act. And because it's so complex, it's natural and normal for us to have problems emerge. So we celebrate those problems by naming them through the inquiry process and systematically studying them, and then taking action based on what we've learned so that we can become the very best teachers that we could be. So before we move on to today's topic on developing a wondering, formalizing the questions that enter your mind as you teach, that's what today's topic of our video is. I wanted to introduce you to yet one more example in addition to Debbie. And I really love this example. This is a teacher. Her name is Stephanie Whitaker. And I love this example because it really encapsulates that notion of inquiry being a way of being and just how you approach your practice. And one of the things you'll learn in this particular video is sometimes inquiry is used by teachers to gain insights into either a single learner or a particular group of learners that may be puzzling to them in some way or have particular needs that really ask for teachers to take this inquiry approach to working with them. And that's what you're going to be doing in PEPSA, right? You are going to be using the inquiry process to better understand your work with students with autism. And so in this example, you're going to meet Stephanie Whitaker. And like you, she works with a particular group of students. She works with ESOL students. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this particular example of teacher inquiry. I want to actually take you to Stephanie's classroom, however, so you can see her in action, you can see her with the students that she teaches, and you can see her approach to teaching them, which is an inquiry approach or an inquiry stance. It's her way of being. So, in order to go on this field trip, you're going to have to do a couple of things. The first thing you're going to have to do in a minute, when I'm done explaining, not quite yet, is pause this video of me sharing with you about wondering development and open up a new window after you pause in your browser. And you're going to type into that window tinyurl.com/inquiry example. And then just click on that link and it's going to take you on that field trip to Stephanie's classroom. So you can actually see her and her students in action and have another example of inquiry to complement and enhance the example that we looked at last time of Debbie Hubble's. All right, are you ready for the field trip? So pause this video now. Go ahead and type in this URL and watch that video on your field trip, and then come on back when you're done, and I will meet you back right here in this video to move on and acknowledge that example and talk a little bit more about the topic of today's inquiry video, which is developing a wondering. Okay, see you back here soon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed visiting Stephanie Whitaker and seeing her in action, both how she teaches and inquires into teaching, and how those two things are seamlessly intertwined with one another. And once again, that is really what inquiry is about. And that's what's so exciting about this PEPSA program is approaching your work with students with autism from an inquiry stance, this way of being where you're always going to be curious about the work that you're doing with students with autism, and you're going to celebrate passions that come up for you, problems of practice that emerge in your work by developing a question that you would like to study in order to gain insights into. And then once you do study it and you learn from it, you can pour that learning back into your work with students with autism, truly becoming the very best that you can be with and for every student with autism that you work with. So it's really exciting. And where it all begins is with that question, the question that you develop. So that's what we're going to cover in today's video. And as a reminder, this is what a wondering is. It's a burning question that you have about your practice. And once again, it emerges at the nexus of two places. The work we do as teachers is inherently incredibly complex. And because of that, we experience felt difficulties and real world dilemmas on a regular basis. And actually, that's something that is so exciting and wonderful about teaching is this notion of problem solving, understanding, being curious. And again, that's what inquiry is all about. And what better way to be curious about something than to pose a question about it? And so that's where your questions emerge at the nexus of the complexity of the work you do and your felt difficulties and real world dilemmas. So you have already seen a couple examples of what wonderings look like. In the little field trip that you took when you visited Stephanie Whitaker's classroom, you learned that her question was it's just sort of very broad. She posed the question to guide her inquiry. How can I help my students improve mathematics to become master learners? So there's a very broad, general, kind of sweeping question. And it was a good match for Stephanie because she was really interested in developing this way of being in her teaching as an inquirer. So that worked great for her. And then you also saw the example in the last video of Debbie Hubble, and her question was, what is the relationship between my fourth grader's fluency development and the reading of fractured fairy tale plays? So keep this in mind. You've already seen two examples of what a question or a wondering can look like as we move forward in today's video. I want to share with you that two examples is a terrific thing. But the more examples, the better, is what I have always learned from coaching this process of inquiry. So, this is just a nice little reminder that you have received your inquiry book as a part of your work with PEPSA. And there is a whole chapter in that book on wondering development. And in that chapter, you will meet many, 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 many more teachers like Stephanie and like Debbie. And you will be able to read about their process of developing a question that they want to study. So please remember to visit your book that you received as a part of the PEPSA program, and particularly look at chapter 2. You're going to find it to be an incredible resource for this topic of developing a wondering. All right, so now let's move on and end this video with talking just for a few minutes about what makes a good wondering or a great question to explore through inquiry. Really, any old question won't do. The process of developing a great question, it takes some time and it takes some playing around with passions and ideas that you have to really zero in and narrow in on something that is studyable and something that's really going to provide great insight for you. So without for any further ado, let's now look at 5 components of what makes a good wondering. So the first one is maybe the most important, and that is passion. So you are in the PEPSA program. Congratulations for being a part of this incredibly wonderful program because you own this great passion for being the very best teacher that you can be for every student with autism that you serve. And so that's what brought you to this program. And so automatically your inquiry journey in the PEPSA program is going to be grounded in passion as you develop your wondering. That said, I want you to think about in relationship to your work with students with autism, what is it that keeps you up at night? What are you thinking about on your drive to work as you are getting ready for your day? And as you ask yourself those questions, you're even going to narrow down more on what you are passionate about exploring in relationship to the work that you do with students with autism. So keep that notion of passion in mind as you develop your first inquiry question. The second component of a good question is connection. So we don't teach in a vacuum. right? So we teach within a particular community, within a particular context, maybe a school or a special program, um, within a particular state, within a particular time of work within that particular state. So, what you want to be thinking about as you develop your wondering is what is going on around you that is helping to shape the work that you do with students with autism. And you will want to be sure that you connect in some way to what's going on in the broader community, what's going on in the broader field of working with students with autism. Okay, so passion, number one, and connection, number two. Here we go with number three. Number three is focus. Because teaching is so complex, there are so many different possibilities for where we can focus our gaze in relationship to inquiry and in relationship to teaching. And they're all really important and wonderful places to focus attention. But sometimes we focus attention outside of the learning experience, the things that contextualize the actual learning of a student. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's natural and normal, and we need to focus our energies in other places as well that contextualize the work we do with an individual student. For inquiry, though, when we're thinking about developing a great question, we really want the focus to be a bullseye focus on student learning. So you want to think in terms of your students and that process of learning. What is a question that connects and focuses on the ways your students learn, gaining insights into their learning process? Okay, so that is the third focus or component of developing a wondering. And now we're going to move on to number four. And number four is actually has two parts to it. So I'll begin with the general notion that the fourth component is that your question needs to be genuine. So what does that mean? It means it needs to be a question that you don't already know the answer to. So I will share with you that in the work I've done with hundreds and hundreds of teachers, sharing this process with them and coaching them through the process, that this is a very empowering process in relationship to the way professional development is often and most commonly done. Professional development for teachers is often something that is done to them, and somebody else makes the decisions about what they will learn. What I love about the process of inquiry is it puts the teacher in the driver's seat of his or her own professional learning. And through the development of a question or a wondering, you get to define and decide what it is you are going to investigate for the purposes of your own professional learning. Now, because this doesn't happen that often, usually topics are picked for you. And again, professional development many times is something done to teachers, right? Because of that, it's sometimes challenging for teachers to develop a question because they're not used to being allowed to drive their own learning. So their gut instinct, because they're so empowered and they're so excited to have this opportunity for the first time, is to develop a question in order to prove something that they know they are doing already and is working great. They want to prove how great it works. Now, the problem with that is that the process of inquiry isn't about proving, it's about improving. That's why we engage in the inquiry process for the first in the first place, is because We acknowledge how complex teaching is, and while we're doing incredibly brilliant things with our students, we know those already work. We don't need proof. Instead, we really want to find a question that gets to the heart of something that we don't know yet and that we can benefit from exploring so that we can improve. So, the first part of being a genuine question is that you are working to develop a question that's about improvement, not proving. Now, the second part of a genuine question, and it's kind of related, is that you want to develop a question that's focused inward on your own practice as a teacher of students with autism, instead of outward on trying to change the students that you work with or change administrators that you work with or change anything that is outside of your control as a teacher. So, one of the premises related to inquiry is the only people we can control is ourselves as teachers. So, we want to make sure that we formulate a question that really focuses inward on us and our practice, because what we learn can absolutely be applicable and we can use it to change ourselves, and we have control over that. We don't have control over many outside forces that shape us, and we certainly can't control other human beings. So we want to focus on the one place that we do have control. So the idea is to really think about something that you would like to gain insights into in order to improve your practice, something about you that you have control over. And that will help you develop a question that is genuine. And there's such beauty in this notion of developing a genuine question. And then finally, last but not least, let's go to that fifth component of developing a good wondering. And that's that the question is open-ended. So it is important to develop an open-ended question because we want to invite exploration, and we also want to acknowledge that great complexity that's inherent in teaching. So because of that, no answer definitively to any question exists. So we don't want to phrase a question as a yes or no question. So, for example, in Debbie's case, she did not phrase her question as, will introducing my students to the reading of fractured fairy tale plays increase their fluency? That would be a kind of that would be a yes or no question, right? Instead, she asked, what is the relationship between the reading of fractured fairy tale plays and my students' fluency development? And that opened the question up for rich exploration. And because it opened the question up to rich exploration, you see that indeed she did learn that there was a positive relationship between her students' engagement in reading fractured fairy tales and their fluency development as captured by her DIBELS data. But then you also saw the richness of three themes that emerged that also fit under the umbrella of the open-ended question that she posed. And it just really enhanced and magnified the learning she was able to do through that cycle of inquiry. So again, you want to be sure that as you work on your question, that you frame it in an open-ended manner. So now we are to the think time part of the video, and that is an invitation to you. I'd like you to think about this question. What are some burning questions you have related to your work with students with autism? And this is where the development of a good wondering begins, is simply with brainstorming. So you might want to take a piece of scrap paper now, and as you end this video, just off the top of your head, start thinking about what are some things you're curious about? What are some things that are keeping you up at night? And you can begin what I like to call the great wondering brainstorm and just let it all flow out of you. Enjoy developing this brainstormed list of possible questions. And then what's going to happen within the PEPSA program is your PEPSA facilitators, they will work with you to help you select a question and refine it so that you can move forward with this powerful process of learning about the work you do with students with autism, the process of inquiry. One more plug for your book, the inquiry book that has been provided to you as a resource as a part of the PEPSA program. Developing a brainstormed list of wonderings is simply one exercise that you can do to help you develop a great question. In your book, once again in chapter 2, you won't just find examples of teachers finding their first wondering, like you saw with Debbie and with Stephanie. You are also going to find a lot of exercises, and many of them I think are creative and fun to do. So as you look and read through that chapter, it's going to take you through passions that you hold. And at the end of each passion, there'll be a series of exercises you can engage in to help you continue to build that great wondering brainstorm list that you have, and to help fuel the very rich conversations that you'll have with your PEPSA facilitators as you decide upon and play with and refine the question that you are going to study as a part of your work in the PEPSA program. So, one word of advice, this might feel like a little overwhelming, but while there's lots of resources to help you develop a good question, I don't want you to get too caught up in developing a question. The beautiful thing about the inquiry process is that you learn by doing. So you can develop a question and you can start studying it. And remember, we talked about how the inquiry process is messy. It doesn't unfold in a neat and linear way. So you can start with a particular question to get you off and running and going. And as you go through the cycle of inquiry, you may learn some things, and that will circle you back to the question you developed, and you might tweak your question. You may redevelop it. So don't get too caught up in the where you're going to start, but indeed give it some good thought to be sure that it contains each of those 5 components that we reviewed in today's video of what makes a good wondering. So that brings closure to today's video on developing a wondering. And of course, I wish you the best as you work on developing your question, and happy inquiring. Until the next video, everybody, thanks for joining me in this discussion of developing a question. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.